Hi, I'm Bailey. At my stepsister's wedding, she seated me at the reject table, handed me a drink with a fake smile, and into the mic she said, "Maybe dating apps will help." Everyone laughed, they always do. But they never ask why I stopped showing up to family events, why I walk in late and leave early, why I smile, but never really stay. They never ask what it's like to be treated like the extra scene in someone else's spotlight. But that night, something cracked. Not in me, in her. Because 5 minutes after her punchline, my boyfriend walked in. And he wasn't just any boyfriend. I never expected an envelope to feel like a punch. But there it was on my doormat, pressed under the weight of perfect calligraphy and embossed seals. I stood in my San Francisco apartment, early evening lights spilling through the windows, as I slid it open with steady fingers. The wedding invite to Callista's big day, ornate, gold-foiled, sealed in translucent vellum. But my name? Misspelled. Haley Renford. No Bailey, no middle initial, no doctor before my name, though I'd completed my PhD years ago. My heart twisted. I sat at my small kitchen table, the envelope torn in half. I pulled out the schedule insert, speeches, toasts, tributes. My name appeared nowhere, not even a placeholder. I stared at that blank line, the black typeface betraying the message it carried. "You're not worth the space." I grew quiet. Years of silent erasure flickered through me. The family photo where I'm hidden behind Callista's shoulder, birthday dinners when I was the odd one missing, the constant echo in holiday gatherings. She's doing her own thing, as though doing your own thing is a crime. They celebrated Callista for her glossy Instagram life, her partner, her projected perfection, and left me to fade. My phone buzzed. My pulse stuttered. "Bailey?" I looked. It was Dad calling. Unusual. I picked up. "Hey, Dad," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook. "Bailey, I hope you saw the invite," he said, clearing his throat. "We'd love for you to come." His tone carried hesitation, as if inviting me was a favor he feared. "Yes, I saw it," I replied carefully. "I noticed my name is printed wrong, and I don't see my name in the speech agenda." I kept calm, knowing any tremble in my voice would betray me. "Oh, must be a mistake. They're still finalizing speakers. I'm sure they'll adjust it," he said. There was a pause. "Let's not make it a bigger thing than it needs to be." "Dad," I choked, "this isn't small, it's deliberate." He cleared his throat. "Bailey, I don't want drama. Let's just enjoy the day." I ended the call, heart pounding. He'd asked me to swallow the insult, to stay invisible, even when they invited me onto their stage. Night fell. I turned on a lamp, lit my small desk. The invitation gleamed under soft light, as though mocking me. I touched the raised gold letters, Callista Richard. She was going to have the spotlight. I wasn't meant to shine. I was invited to perform as a footnote. I leaned back, the chair creaking. My fingers curled into fists. I thought of the quiet nights I stayed up revising proposals, the grants I won, the papers I published, the jobs I declined because they clashed with family dinners. All those sacrifices. And now this. I knew, in that moment, that this wedding wouldn't be a gathering of love. It would be a showcase, a litter of the perfect family. My presence would be tolerated, but only as the overlooked sister. I set the invitation down and whispered to myself, barely audible. I should have said no, right then and there. But some wounds don't bleed. They burn slow. I barely slept the night before. The invitation lay on my dresser like a dare, its gold edges catching the weak morning light. By the time the sun rose over San Francisco, I'd already packed the small garment bag with the dress I chose, navy silk, elegant but understated. I didn't want to draw attention, yet part of me still craved to look like someone who belonged. Driving up to Napa Valley felt surreal. The sky shifted from muted gray over the bay to bright California blue as I wound along Highway 29. Vineyards rolled past on both sides, endless rows of green under sun-warmed hills. I rehearsed in my head the neutral smile I'd wear, the polite answers I'd give. My palms sweated despite the car's air conditioning. When I pulled into the Belmont estate, I had to catch my breath. The place was something out of a magazine. Arched gates, fountains spilling over marble bowls, rose gardens manicured to perfection. I parked where the valet pointed, gathered my things, and stepped onto the gravel drive. The air smelled of lavender and expensive perfume. No one from my family came to greet me. Instead, a young wedding planner with a clipboard and a fixed smile appeared. "Name?" she asked. "Bailey Renford," I said. She scanned her list. "Oh, yes, table 14. She handed me a tiny white card. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She knew exactly where that table was. Inside, the reception hall glittered with crystal chandeliers and gold-rimmed plates. Strings of soft music floated from the quartet in the corner. I saw Callista across the room in her dress, a confection of lace and sparkle, surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers. She didn't glance at me. A staffer in black led me across the hall, weaving between tables draped in ivory linen, each with centerpieces of white peonies. The air cooled as we neared the back. He stopped near the swinging kitchen doors and gestured to a table tucked almost against the wall on table 14. 3 young women sat there already, tapping at their phones. They wore cocktail dresses, high heels too new to have scuff marks. One of them glanced at me and gave a polite nod before going back to scrolling. An elderly cousin, Aunt Miriam's second husband's sister, sat at the edge, adjusting her hearing aid. She looked up and mistook me for staff. "Could you bring me some more water, dear?" I sat down slowly, smoothing my dress over my knees. The roar of the kitchen behind me, clattering trays, staff calling orders, drowned out the music. Every other table glowed under chandeliers. Ours sat in the shadows, just outside the frame of the photographers. I tried to join in the conversation of the 3 younger women. "Are you friends of Callista's?" I asked. One flicked her hair. "Co-workers at her firm," she said, eyes sliding past me. They went back to comparing nail colors. As the reception filled, the energy in the room rose like steam. Waiters passed with champagne. I took a flute, holding it carefully to steady my hand. My phone buzzed with a text from a colleague. "Are you surviving the circus?" And I typed back a single word. "Barely." The ceremony itself blurred past. I stood when told, sat when told, smiled when expected. Through it all, Callista looked like a star on stage, her groom like a man who'd won a prize. When the applause faded and the guests moved to the dining area, I followed the slow procession back to table 14. Then came the microphone. Callista's voice rang out over the speakers. "I want to take a moment," she said, "to thank everyone who made today possible. My friends, my colleagues, my wonderful new family." She paused, scanning the room with practiced eyes. "And my dear sister Bailey for making the trip despite her busy Tinder schedule." A ripple of laughter spread, cameras clicked, someone at another table snorted. The 3 women at my table glanced at each other, smirking. The elderly cousin whispered, "What's Tinder?" My stomach dropped as though the floor had opened. Heat flushed up my neck. I stared at my glass, willing my hand not to tremble. I knew better than to stand up or shout back. Every fiber of me screamed to disappear, but I was locked there, frozen in my chair. Callista winked at Richard's cousin across the room, an inside joke, pre-planned. I could see it in their eyes. Inside my head, memories flickered like old slides. Callista at 16 telling me, "You're too picky, that's why no one dates you." Callista at 22 during Christmas, joking, "Don't be so intimidating, you'll scare them off." And last year at Thanksgiving, whispering under her breath, "Clock's ticking, Bailey." Always with that same sweet sour smile, I sipped the champagne to give my shaking hands something to do. The bubbles burned my throat. Around me, laughter dulled to murmurs as the DJ started music again. But inside me, the humiliation stayed sharp, like glass lodged under the skin. I breathed in slowly, counting. I wouldn't give them the spectacle of my anger. Not here, not yet. That's when I knew, I thought, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I wasn't just excluded. I was their entertainment. I pushed my chair back from table 14, my heart still hammering against my ribs. The laughter from the room spilled after me as I made my way to the corridor outside the reception hall. My heels clicked on the marble like a metronome to my breath, slow, deliberate, keeping me upright. A waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres sidestepped me politely, his eyes flicking once to my face and then away, the way people look at someone holding themselves together by a thread. I told the wedding planner I needed the restroom, and she pointed down a side hall lined with framed vineyard landscapes. The laughter and music from the reception dimmed with each step, replaced by the low hum of air conditioning and my own pulse. Inside the restroom, everything gleamed: white marble sinks, gold fixtures, fresh orchids on the counter. I chose the farthest stall, locked the door, and sat on the closed lid, gripping my clutch like a lifeline. My breath came uneven. The humiliation from the toast still burned, but it was deeper than that. It was the old ache that had been there since childhood, the one that came every time I was made small. After a long moment, I stood, splashed cool water on my face, and looked into the mirror. My reflection looked polished, navy dress neat, hair pinned just so, but my eyes told the truth. They were the same eyes that had stared at a birthday cake with no candles because the party had been canceled as punishment for something I hadn't done. The same eyes that learned early how to smile when it hurt. The memory rose before I could stop it. I was 9. The house was smaller then, but filled with the smell of lemon polish and our stepmother's perfume. A porcelain vase, her pride and joy, had been displayed on the console table in the hallway. That afternoon, Callista and I were playing near it, though I'd told her not to. She spun around with the broom she was pretending was a microphone. The vase tipped, wobbled, and fell. It hit the floor and shattered like ice. When our stepmother came running, Callista's eyes went wide, then darted to me. "Bailey knocked it," she said quickly. "I didn't," I whispered, but my voice came out thin. Our stepmother's face hardened. "Bailey, how could you? That vase was from my grandmother." "I didn't." I tried again, but my stepfather had appeared now, his mouth a thin line. "No birthday party for you this year," he said before I could explain. "I'm tired of this behavior." Callista pressed her lips together, as though suppressing tears, then leaned toward me when they turned away. "Good girls don't snitch," she whispered, her breath sweet with the candy she'd been given earlier. Then she skipped off to change into the new dress she'd been promised for the party I would no longer have. In the restroom now, decades later, my hands gripped the edge of the marble sink, my stomach clenched with the same powerless rage I'd felt as a child. Back then, I'd written everything down in little notebooks because no one wanted to hear it. That's how I'd learned to hold my tongue, how to make my pain private. I left the restroom before anyone could come in. The corridor opened into a side door leading outside. Sunlight struck my face as I stepped into the courtyard, blinking. The vines stretched toward the horizon. My rental car sat at the edge of the gravel lot. I walked to it slowly, each step loosening the knot inside my chest just enough to breathe again. Inside the car, I shut the door and let the quiet wrap around me. The laughter from the hall was a distant echo now. I laid my head back against the seat, eyes closed. And like a thread pulling from a spool, another memory surfaced. The letter. I'd been 22 then, in my last year of grad school. One night, after another family gathering where Callista's achievements had been paraded and mine ignored, I'd sat in my tiny apartment and written a letter to my father. The words had poured out of me faster than I could write them. Please stop comparing me to Callista. Please see me for who I am, not who I'm not. Please stop making me feel like a defective version of someone else. I'd told him about the vase, about the birthdays, about every little slight that had built up like stones in my pockets. By the time I finished, my hand cramped and my eyes were raw. I'd folded the letter neatly, addressed it, but never mailed it. I couldn't bear the possibility that he would ignore it, or worse, dismiss it. Instead, I tucked it into the back of a childhood book, a copy of Charlotte's Web my mother had given me before she left. Every time I'd moved, I brought that book with me, the letter still hidden inside. Sitting there in the car now, I imagined the envelope, yellowed a little by time, but still sealed. It felt like a piece of my younger self was still inside, waiting for someone to care. I opened my eyes and caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The same eyes as before, but something different around the mouth. A steadiness. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt angry in a way that wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about the life I'd built despite it all. I thought of how I'd gotten my doctorate while working 2 jobs, how I'd learned to stand in front of lecture halls and speak without trembling, how I'd paid for my own apartment, my own car, my own future. Every success had been built in the shadow of their dismissal. The humiliation of the toast still stung, but alongside it rose a new kind of heat, one that felt like a forge rather than a wound. I started the engine but didn't drive off. Instead, I sat there, breathing, letting the memories settle. The courtyard bustled quietly as guests mingled outside, oblivious. After a while, I opened the door and stepped out again. The air smelled of wine and earth. I straightened my shoulders, smoothing my dress. My steps back toward the hall felt different, measured, calm. This time, I wasn't walking back in as someone trying to belong. I was walking in as someone who finally understood she didn't need to. She may have tried to bury me with shame, but all she did was uncover my roots. I walked back into the reception hall slowly, like stepping into a room where the air had changed. Outside in the courtyard, the vines had been quiet company, letting me breathe. Now, crossing the threshold again, I felt my shoulders straighten of their own accord. I wasn't going to vanish into a corner anymore. Not tonight. Table 14 waited like a sentence I hadn't finished. I passed the buffet and the bar where guests laughed, their voices carrying over the music. The DJ was switching tracks, coaxing people to the dance floor. Someone offered me a punch from a tray. I smiled politely, shook my head, and kept walking. When I reached my table, the 3 young co-workers were gone, dancing in a circle near the front. The elderly cousin was still there, sipping ginger ale and reading the program as though it were a church bulletin. The chair next to me was empty, the one no one had claimed. I sat, placing my clutch on the table, and picked up my glass. The bubbles in the champagne had long since gone flat. Across the room, Callista stood with her new husband, her dress sparkling under the lights. She was laughing at something a groomsman said, basking in the glow like she always did. I took a small sip, more to steady myself than anything. My resolve was a quiet thing, but solid, like stone under water. Then I heard a voice close to my ear. "Mind if I sit here?" I turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit stood at the edge of the table. He looked a little older than me, maybe mid-40s, with hair just beginning to silver at the temples, and an expression that belonged more to boardrooms than weddings. Before I could answer, he slid into the empty seat and leaned slightly toward me. His voice dropped to a low whisper. "Act like you're with me." I froze. My instinct was to laugh, but there was something in his eyes, steady, intent, that stopped me. I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't demand anything, just offers calm. Then he draped his arm behind my chair, not touching me, but enough that anyone looking would assume we were together. The room shifted. Conversation slowed. I saw the moment Callista noticed. Across the dance floor, her smile faltered for a heartbeat. She whispered something to her husband, but he shrugged, oblivious. I leaned slightly away, my voice just above the music. "Who are you?" "Victor Ashford," he said. "Cousin of the groom. We've never met." I blinked. "Why are you—" He cut in gently. "Because I overheard what your sister said. Back by the patio, before the toast. She didn't recognize me, but I heard every word." My stomach tightened. "You didn't have to." "I couldn't stand it," Victor said, his tone low but firm. "No one deserves to be talked about like that, especially not by their own family. You looked like you were sitting here alone on an island. I thought maybe I could change the picture." For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. Around us, whispers started, Richard's colleagues glancing over, one of them elbowing another and nodding in our direction. Even the elderly cousin peeked up from her program, eyes bright with curiosity. I straightened a little. "So this is a rescue mission?" He chuckled softly. "Call it a course correction. Sometimes perception is the only weapon you need." I thought about that as I reached for my glass again. My fingers didn't shake this time. Across the room, Callista's gaze swept over us like a searchlight. Her laugh was sharper now, forced. Victor spoke again, still looking at me but pitched for my ears only. She's built a story about you, hasn't she? Always the same lines. Too picky, too busy, too intimidating. Easy to paint someone like that as a punchline. I swallowed. She's been doing it since we were kids. I could tell, he said simply. People like her forget that others are listening. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time all day, I felt the edge of relief, small but real. Not because someone had swooped in to save me, because someone had seen. We sat like that for a few minutes, saying nothing, just watching the dance floor. Victor kept his arm resting lightly on the back of my chair, an unspoken shield. Guests passed, their eyes flicking toward us, their expressions recalibrating. At another table, a bridesmaid whispered to a groomsman, and they both glanced at me with new interest. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. I no longer looked like the forgotten sister at the reject table. I looked chosen. I tilted my head toward Victor. You realize she's not going to like this. He smiled with a trace of mischief. Let her come. I don't scare easy. Across the dance floor, Callista had stepped away from her circle. Her heels clicked against the wood as she started walking toward us, each step a punctuation mark. Her face held that tight smile I knew too well, the one she used when she was about to turn a moment into a stage. And as Callista walked toward us, heels clicking like war drums, I knew this was far from over. The heels had barely settled into the ballroom's polished floor when Callista swept across toward me and Victor. One moment, I sat as if invisible. The next, she was before us, lips curved in a practiced smile. Her dress caught the light like a flash, drawing every eye. I felt them shift, expectant, curious, wary. Bailey, she said, too bright, too breathless. I didn't realize you knew Victor. I glanced at Victor. He stood, buttoning his jacket, composed. We've met a few times over family gatherings, he replied smoothly. Small world, isn't it? Callista's eyes flicked to me, then to him, then back again. She gave a tight nod. Yes. Yes. Very small. Her voice pitched artificially high. Callista reached out, grasping Victor's hand. You two must catch up. How long have you known each other? I weighed my response, then leaned into the new dynamic. A few years, I said. We've stayed in occasional touch, I offered her a soft smile. She faltered for a moment, then pressed on. What exactly do you do these days, Bailey? I've heard interesting things. Victor interjected, tone light. She's doing well in her own field, interior design and consulting, and freelancing for nonprofits. He glanced at me, then at Callista. Maybe you've seen her work around town? Callista stiffened. Her smile faltered. She recovered. Yes. Well, I've seen many beautiful places. Hard to remember who did what. Victor nodded politely, then turned to me. She asked me earlier, what's Bailey's real job? As though, despite years of success, she remains a mystery. I fought the impulse to flush. Their world had always framed me as a sidebar. The sister whose work didn't matter, whose presence was ornamental at best. But tonight, I refused to shrink. The guests had gathered closer. Murmurs fluttered like wind through dry leaves. Callista's laughter, once full, now had an edge of strain. She attempted to usher me aside, perhaps to reclaim control. Why don't you come closer, Bailey, away from that table in the shadows? I shook my head. I think I'll stay. Calm, but firm. Richard appeared then, offering a cordial smile. Callista leaned into him, as though he might rescue her, but he merely nodded to Victor's presence and glanced at me with unreadable politeness. Victor lowered his voice, lips just inches from my ear. She's trying to hold the narrative. Don't give her the satisfaction. I swallowed, measuring my pulse. I realized at that moment I was no longer pretending. I was beginning to own every vantage point. Across the ballroom, a bridesmaid nudged someone and tilted her head toward us. Another guest raised a champagne flute in our direction, a silent toast of solidarity. I drew in a steady breath, feeling, for the first time in years, quiet vindication. Then the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. All single ladies to the floor, get ready for the bouquet toss. The room stirred. Callista's eyes gleamed with mischief. She snatched up the mic again. Her next move had been set long ago. My heart hammered. She wasn't done playing her game, but I had learned that games could shift. I rose from the seat at table 14, the laughter still ringing faintly behind me. The bouquet announcement had shifted the room's energy, nerves, anticipation, whispers, like a storm gathering. Callista's hand gripped the microphone as the DJ counted down, and I could feel the electric charge in the air. When the announcement came, all single ladies to the dance floor, the women rose at once, skirts sweeping, heels clicking. Callista stepped into the spotlight, her eyes flicking toward me. She lifted the mic, and her voice cut clean across the hall. "Let's not forget my stepsister," she said, voice brittle, "who's still playing the dating game. Maybe this helps you out?" A forced laugh surged through the crowd. Cameras flickered. Victor stiffened beside me. Their eyes darted over to my face. Heat flushed my cheeks, not from shame, but from something hotter, anger coalescing. The bridesmaid beside me reached and nudged me forward into the circle of women. I moved, my steps steady, though my insides trembled. The bouquet sailed across the room. Strategically, I realized, landing at the feet of someone else entirely. The crowd cheered. Callista smiled triumphantly. I returned to my table, my palms tight around the edge. I felt eyes on me, some sympathetic, some curious, some judgmental. But this was not humiliation. It was a pivot. Victor looked at me, surprise and something like admiration flickering in his eyes. I cleared my throat. I stood, not with tears, not with a plea, but with purpose. I walked straight toward the DJ booth, heels clicking my resolve into the silence of the room. The music stopped, heads turned, all cameras pivoted, Callista's lips parted. I accepted the mic, heart steady. "I wasn't planning to speak tonight," I said, voice soft but clear. "But since I've been made into entertainment, I might as well perform." The room exhaled. My voice held firm as I continued. "You've all heard the jokes. The invisible sister, the one still looking, the one no one believes in. But I want you to listen now, not to their version of me, but my truth." I paused. The silence weighed in. I pressed on. I have walked through years of being shown the door in family photos, whispered about at tables, dismissed as too picky or too busy. I learned early that being polite costs everything. So tonight, I choose to be seen. A sparkle in my breath as I looked at Callista directly. Being alone doesn't mean I'm broken. But shrinking someone else to make yourself look bigger, that's the real brokenness. Slow claps began, sparse at first, then rippling into a wave. Victor joined me at the microphone, placing his hand lightly over mine. Callista's shoulders sank. Her lips curved in a forced smile. The room's energy crackled, her empire of pretense starting to crack. Just when I thought it was over, the DJ plucked the mic back, an abrupt fade. I felt the hum of news gathering in the air, cameras, whispers, shifting loyalties. And as I stood there, heart still pounding, I heard a single phrase echo in my mind. She had held back one final attack, and she was about to unleash it. The song faded behind us, dissolving into a low hum of murmurs and glass clinks. I followed Victor from the edge of the dance floor, our shoes tapping lightly against the parquet as we stepped into the dimmer corner near the DJ booth. Away from the spotlight, but not away from the stairs. I could feel them trailing us like invisible hands, eyes that hadn't stopped watching since I took the mic. Victor placed his palm gently against the small of my back. Just that, one solid touch, no words. But in that moment, it was enough to steady the tremble I didn't want anyone to see. The silence was thick, sacred almost, until a click echoed across the room. It was subtle at first, just a soft, mechanical sound, the kind most people wouldn't notice at a celebration like this. But I knew that click. Projector. A cold thread ran down my spine. At the far end of the room, a giant screen flickered to life. Light washed across the hardwood floors, dancing up the walls, casting blurry shadows. I turned my head slowly, instinctively, my stomach knotting. This wasn't part of the wedding itinerary. Whispers swirled, guests pointed, curious. Some smiled, expecting a fun montage. I couldn't move. A slow, sharp chill crept up my neck. Then the slideshow began. At first, it seemed harmless, almost sweet. Childhood photos filled the screen, chubby cheeks, birthday cakes, trips to the coast, our mom's arms around us, familiar images, nostalgia that should have felt warm. I recognized our old backyard in Oregon. I recognized my own laughter, captured mid-swing, the softness of what was once real. But the tone shifted, quickly. The photos faded. In their place came screenshots, emails, journals, my journals, lines I'd written in solitude, never shared. Not with Victor, not with anyone. Sentences scrawled in the dark, late at night, when I felt like the world had swallowed me whole. My words, I saw them appear like headlines. I feel invisible. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm tired of pretending. I'll never be enough. My knees nearly buckled. Each word slammed into me like a slap. My own handwriting digitized, projected 30 feet wide across a ballroom filled with silk gowns and rented tuxedos, strangers, family. All of them watching my most private pain scroll across a screen as if it were entertainment. I couldn't breathe. The sound began then. Audio clips. Recordings. My voice, trembling, raw, unfiltered. Why can't I be enough? I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm shrinking. I clutched the back of a chair to stay upright. The room had gone completely silent. No clinking glasses, no chatter, just the slow, burning horror of recognition. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A few covered their mouths. One woman actually looked away and shook her head. And across the room, like a portrait lit from within, stood Callista. Her expression glowed. Proud. Satisfied. Triumphant. Victor noticed her before I did. His hand released mine, and without a word, he strode across the floor, purpose carved into every step. He reached the AV table, muttered something to the technician, and without hesitation, yanked the wires free. The screen went black mid-sentence. A low, mechanical whir faded. Lights dimmed again. The room buzzed with confusion, like air sucked from a balloon. Victor took the microphone from the stand and turned to face everyone. He wasn't angry. He was composed, steady. His voice cut clean through the silence. That wasn't a tribute. That wasn't love. That was a violation. Murmurs started again, quiet at first. He scanned the room, eyes calm. Then he looked toward me and extended his hand, inviting me forward. I didn't hesitate. I joined him beneath the dead screen, heart thudding in my chest, throat tight. I met the gazes turned toward me, some sympathetic, some uncertain. I saw relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, old coworkers, neighbors, people who now saw a version of me I never chose to show. Victor spoke again. His voice didn't waver. You don't humiliate someone like this unless you're afraid of them. This wasn't a celebration. It was a spectacle meant to shame a woman for daring to survive. Then he looked at me, gave me space. I took the mic, and I breathed. My privacy was ripped from me tonight, I began, slow but clear. My inner thoughts, words never meant to be public, were weaponized to make me feel small, again. I paused, let the stillness hold. But I'm done shrinking. I scanned the room. My voice grew stronger. I have spent years swallowing pain, trying to keep peace, learning to smile while it hurt. But pain doesn't make you weak. It teaches you what you're made of. A soft sound broke in the corner. Someone sniffled. I continued. To Callista, this was power, this was control. But it wasn't. It was fear. Fear that I might become something without her permission. But I already have. I turned toward her. She stood frozen, lips parted, face pale, not triumphant now. I'm not your victim. I'm not your secret to expose. I'm not your backup act or your project to fix. I am whole. Flawed, yes, but mine. Every scar, every page you tried to make people laugh at, that was my story. And tonight, I reclaim it. There was a beat of silence. Then, applause. Tentative at first, then stronger. One guest rose to their feet, then another. Victor stood quietly beside me, his hand brushing mine again. Across the room, I saw Callista's father stand slowly. He didn't say a word, just walked toward the door, his expression unreadable, eyes lowered. Her bridesmaids shifted, whispering. No one followed her. Victor leaned in, voice low. We're leaving, not in retreat, but because you deserve better than this circus. I nodded. I turned, retrieved my clutch, and we walked. As we passed Callista, I paused just long enough to look her in the eye. This wedding was never yours to control, I said quietly. She didn't speak. Cameras clicked as we walked away. The crowd parted without hesitation. But just before the doors swung open behind us, I heard a flicker of sound. A gasp. Lights above flickered. One more moment. The story wasn't over yet. The doors behind us clicked shut with a dull echo. I stepped into the corridor that curved behind the reception hall, my heart still racing, breath shallow and uneven. Just minutes ago, I'd stood beneath a cascade of chandeliers, facing hundreds of carefully curated guests, and saying what had never been said aloud. Now, the quiet corridor seemed like another world, dimly lit, hushed, heavy with aftermath. The soft overhead lighting cast golden halos along the marble floor, giving everything a surreal glow. Victor followed just behind me, his steps measured, purposeful, a steady presence in my wake. I could still hear the muffled echo of voices behind the double doors of the ballroom, some curious, some alarmed, some still trying to piece together what exactly had just happened. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. As we walked slowly toward the foyer, I could taste it, the tension in the air, like the final sting after a thunderclap. The kind of pressure that only builds after truth is finally spoken. Victor glanced over, voice low but sure. I think this is it. I nodded, but I wasn't sure what it even meant anymore. The end? The beginning? A reckoning? We passed the photographer on the way, his camera now packed in a sleek black bag slung over one shoulder. He gave us a strange look, as if debating whether to ask a question, but ultimately said nothing. The silence felt more respectful than awkward. As we rounded a column near the main entryway, the red carpet unrolled beneath our feet. That's when everything shifted. A woman in a sleek navy blazer stood directly in Callista's path at the entrance to the ballroom. She was calm, composed. In her hand, an envelope, the kind with legal weight, thick, rectangular, unambiguous. Callista stopped, confused. Her smile, still frozen in performative charm, began to falter. She took the envelope with a flicker of hesitation. Her fingers dug into the seam, tearing it open. As she pulled out the paper inside, I caught a glimpse, either cream or a soft legal orange, the color of formality and consequence. She read, and then, she screamed. The sound ripped through the hallway like a struck violin string, high, brittle, breaking something invisible. Heads turned, voices hushed. A gasp fluttered through the air. From behind us, someone whispered, "What is happening?" Callista's eyes were wide, frantic. Her face had drained of all color. The documents fluttered to the floor like wilted petals. Two of her assistants appeared out of nowhere, hands outstretched, trying to usher her away, to fix something they didn't understand yet. But before they reached her, Victor stepped forward. "That's a lawsuit," he said calmly, like he was reading a recipe aloud. "Defamation, disclosure of protected medical information, HIPAA violations. You leaked private records and used them to publicly shame someone." His voice was clear, even, and loud enough to reach the ears that mattered. The assistants stopped. They looked at each other, unsure whether to advance or back away. Callista turned to Victor, her mouth opening in shock. You're serious! This is my wedding day!" Victor met her glare without flinching. "You made that choice the moment you weaponized someone else's trauma." Her voice cracked. "You can't do this to me." "I can, and I am," he said, with finality. People were filming now. I saw phones raised, tablets lit up, heads turning. No longer hushed curiosity. Now it was spectacle. The very thing Callista had always chased. The venue manager, a thin man with a headset, slipped quietly beside her. "Miss Callista, I must ask you to remain calm. If not, we'll have to ask you to leave the premises." She spun on him, rage bubbling in her voice. "Leave? This is my wedding. My reception. My night!" But the crowd around her had shifted. The mood had turned. People were no longer smiling indulgently. Some were watching with subtle disapproval. Others looked disappointed, betrayed. A few looked toward me, and this time, it wasn't with pity. It was something else, something close to respect. That's when a new voice rose above the crowd. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, holding a tablet, stepped up onto the small reception stage near the DJ booth. I recognized him as a family friend, a neutral party. He held the device aloft and tapped the screen. "Before we call it a night," he said clearly, "there's something you all need to see." The ballroom hushed again. The screen lit up. A video began to play. On screen was Callista's ex-fiancé. His face filled the frame, looking directly into the camera. No glitz, no filter, just truth. "I was manipulated," he said quietly, "by someone I trusted. I ended my relationship with Bailey because I believed lies told to me by Callista. Lies that made me question Bailey's worth, her stability, even her sanity." My breath caught. I wasn't prepared for this. He continued, voice steady. "There were things said behind closed doors. Messages, fake concern, real damage. I was made to believe that keeping the spotlight on Callista was more important than seeing Bailey for who she truly is, and I regret it." My knees buckled slightly. Victor moved closer, subtle but certain. His arm touched mine, steadying. The video went on, highlighting the manipulation, the sabotage, even screen captures of texts Callista had sent, some edited, some forged. And most painfully, it included messages I had written to myself during that time. Voice memos I never shared. Words I had buried. On screen, truth bloomed. When the video ended, the man lowered the tablet. He said only, "End of story?" Callista didn't answer. Couldn't. Her bridesmaids were whispering among themselves, the cracks in their alliance now visible. Her father stood from his seat, grim-faced, looking at the floor. The entire room felt suspended in breath. I stepped forward, slowly, toward Callista. She didn't move. I leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for her to hear, "This wasn't your dream day. It was your unmasking." Her mouth twitched, but no words came. I turned and walked away. The screens faded to black. The DJ, wisely, didn't cue any music. Guests began rising. Some left immediately. Others lingered in disbelief. Victor reached for my hand. "We'll walk out together," he said, his voice so calm it cut through the tension like a ribbon. And so we did. We walked through the heart of the silence, through the camera flashes, past rows of stunned guests frozen in disbelief, past Callista, who stood motionless, framed by elegance and exposed truths. Outside, the night air wrapped around us like a balm. The estate lights cast a golden aura behind us, illuminating what we were leaving behind. And ahead of us, only darkness, only quiet. But it wasn't empty. It was possibility. As we stepped onto the driveway, the stars glittered in the sky. My breath slowed. Victor gave my hand a final squeeze, and for the first time in years, I felt light, not weightless, but unburdened. When the glitter faded and the music died down, all that remained was the truth and its consequences. We stepped out into the cooling night air, the faint hum of music from the estate still echoing behind us. My heels clicked softly on the stone path as we made our way through the garden, away from the glowing lights of a night that had ended far differently than I ever imagined. The ballroom had exhaled, and in its wake was silence, thick, expectant, and sacred. Victor walked beside me, his presence a quiet anchor in the chaos still roaring in my mind. By the time we reached my door, my hand was trembling, not violently, just enough to fumble the keys once or twice. Inside, the house was dim and still, the only sound a low hum from the refrigerator and the distant buzz of my phone lighting up with unread notifications. I dropped my clutch onto the console and kicked off my shoes with a sigh. Victor closed the door behind us without a word and followed me into the living room. I collapsed onto the couch, the soft cushions swallowing me whole. Victor sat close, his shoulder touching mine, grounding me. We didn't speak, not yet. The space between us was filled with everything unspoken: shock, sadness, maybe even a hint of liberation. I pulled my phone from my lap, hesitated, and then opened it. The screen came alive with alerts, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, news links, even viral videos already making the rounds. The clips were shaky and short, but unmistakable. Callista's voice, the fallout, my face frozen in the moment I chose to stand tall. Strangers were reaching out, some with words of support, others with sympathy, even admiration. "You're a warrior. Takes guts to do what you did. I wish I had your courage." I didn't know what to do with their praise. It felt too soon, too big, but I kept scrolling, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. Victor's hand found mine, warm and firm. We held on. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, flashes of the evening replayed. Callista's smug smirk, the silence that followed my speech, the shifting expressions in the crowd. I wasn't haunted by what I said. I stood by it. But the ripples it caused, those were still forming, still crashing into things I hadn't braced for. The morning arrived with sunlight streaming through my curtains like an unexpected guest. I wrapped myself in a shawl, made coffee, and stood by the window, the mug warming my palms. The world outside seemed calm. Birds hopping across the fence, a jogger passing with earbuds in. Ordinary life, unchanged. But inside me, something fundamental had shifted. A new notification pinged. This time, it wasn't a friend or distant relative. It was an email from a woman named Renee, an editor at a wellness magazine I admired. Her message was simple, but stunning. She'd seen the video. She believed I had something to say. She offered me a column. "Healing and voices from the silent," she wrote. "We want women like you to lead the conversation." I sat with that for a long time, staring at her words. Then I opened a new tab and replied, "Yes, I'd like to try." The days that followed blurred together in a strange mix of stillness and chaos. On one hand, I was cocooned in quiet. Victor's steady presence, the sound of my own breath as I walked through the house, the click of my keyboard as I tried to make sense of everything. On the other hand, the world outside was swirling. News articles, social media threads, reaction videos. Callista's sponsors dropped her within days. Her beauty line issued a statement about reviewing their values. She released her own statement too, something half-hearted, the usual PR speak of lessons learned and regret for the pain caused. But it fell flat. People saw through it. And for once, they weren't letting her rewrite the narrative. One afternoon, I set my phone aside and stood in front of the bedroom mirror. I didn't look different, same hair, same eyes, but something inside me had been rewritten. There was no revenge plan anymore, no need to prove anything to anyone. Just space. The kind of space you don't realize you were starving for until you finally breathe it in. I opened my journal and started to write. The pen moved on its own, as if it had been waiting for this release. The wound didn't vanish, but I stopped letting it bleed every time she smiled. I stared at the line for a long moment, then closed the journal, pressing my hand to the cover. That was enough for today. A week later, I visited my mother's grave. The plot was tucked into a quiet corner of the cemetery, under a tree that whispered when the wind passed through. Her headstone had weathered over the years, but her name was still clear. I knelt down, fingers grazing the carved letters, and laid a single white lily beside her. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why she let so much go unspoken. I just sat in silence, letting the distance settle between us like a peaceful fog. I didn't need her answers anymore. Victor met me in the parking lot afterward. He didn't ask what I said, or if I was okay. He just held the car door open and took my hand when I stepped out. We drove in comfortable silence, the kind only possible between people who've seen each other cracked and still choose to stay. That night over dinner, he looked at me and said softly, "I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we moved in together." My fork paused mid-air. The idea surprised me. Not because I didn't want it, but because for the first time in a long while, I felt free enough to consider it. Yes, I said after a beat. But slowly. Let's take our time. He smiled, that warm kind of smile that meets you where you are. No rush, he agreed. Let's just be happy, quietly, away from the noise. And so we began again. In the weeks that followed, I found a rhythm that felt like mine. I wrote my first column. I spent afternoons by the lake near our new place, letting the sound of water clear out the noise. I started yoga. I got a dog. I even planted herbs, something I'd always thought I'd be terrible at, and somewhere along the way, I started smiling without effort. One breezy morning, standing by the lake, I watched my reflection shimmer in the water. The surface rippled with wind, but beneath it was a steadiness that mirrored something in me. Betrayal had carved a deep place in my life, but from that hollow, something new had grown. Not vengeance, not perfection, just clarity. I whispered to the breeze, some stories don't end, they evolve. And this one, this chapter, is mine now. The truth is, the people who try the hardest to dim your light are often the ones who fear it the most. But real power, real healing, it doesn't come from fighting back louder. It comes from standing tall anyway, from reclaiming your story, your space, your peace. Have you ever felt like the afterthought in your own family? Like your voice was the one no one wanted to hear? If you have, I want to know. What did you do? How did you rise? Drop your story in the comments. I promise this is a space for truth. And if this hit home, don't forget to hit subscribe. There are more stories ahead, more truth, more healing, and maybe, just maybe, a path forward for all of us who were once told we were too much or not enough. You're not alone. You were never alone. And this time, we get the mic.